friends. I welcome you all to
interest and some sort of motivation to do something.
Would you like to sit down and talk? So that's fine with us. Be comfortable.
It's okay. I mean, maybe I'll sit down after some time.
Very nice.
So one of the things we decided to do is we would go to the Supreme Court and file a public interest litigation asking candidates to declare their financial and criminal records. The immediate motivation for us was that several prime ministers, at least two prime ministers of this country, Rajiv Gandhi and Narasimha Rao, were seriously implicated in fairly large scams and scandals running into several crores. And then we had Lalu Prasad and Jayalalitha and many other leading lights who were implicated in all sorts of scams. And what was happening, we noticed, is that every 5 or 10 years, one more zero was being added, because Bofors was 64 crores. Today nobody would blink at 64 crores. Then 64 became 1,000, 1,000 became 10,000, now we have Telgi scam, and now we don't know what all is happening. And we felt that let us try to do something about it. So we went to the court to file a PIL, and we were advised by our lawyers that if you lose the case, you won't be able to appeal, so why don't you go to the High Court. I'll get into some details because it's not the detail that is important, it highlights something about the nature of the political system that we learned, and I think it would be useful to share this with you. So when we went to the High Court, we of course won the case, and the High Court said that the candidates would have to declare this. And as expected, the government of India, at that time it was the NDA government, and then the major opposition party, at that time it was the Congress, they appealed against this High Court judgment in the Supreme Court, and several politicians including George Fernandez filed an intervention. Now when it went to the Supreme Court, we were highly concerned that what is the Election Commission going to do about it? Would they support our petition and support the High Court judgment, or would they say something saying that this is a good idea but it can't be done? So we sought meetings with the Election Commission, and to cut a long story short, the Election Commission was very concerned how they are going to collect all this information on candidate background. How will they find out who's got a criminal record? How will they verify its accuracy? And how will they disseminate it to the public? So that was a very useful meeting, because we pleaded with the Election Commission. It was a private meeting. That, sir, the Election Commission is not to collect this information. It is not to verify its accuracy. It is not to put a stamp of approval saying that this is authentic information. It is merely to collect self-declared information of candidates and place it before the public. So once that our plea was made clear to them, the Election Commission later met 3 times as a full commission. And in fact, Mr. Lingdo, who has become a good friend over the years, he was also one of the election commissioners at that time. They took a decision that they will support our plea. So that on May 2nd, 2002, I mean these dates are imprinted in our minds, the Supreme Court gave a landmark judgment, and they said that candidates would have to declare their background in the form of a sworn affidavit as a necessary part of their nomination papers. And I say, since I see some highly respected justices here, if I make any mistake, I'm sure he will correct me and pardon me. But the Supreme Court tied it to the fundamental right under Article 19(1)(a), which is technically called the freedom of expression and popularly known as the right to information. And the court in its judgment said that when you and I go to vote, we are exercising that freedom of expression, and to properly exercise that freedom of expression, we need to know some basic information about the candidate, and they specified 5 items that the candidates would have to declare. So they gave it a sound constitutional basis. That's the point I'm trying to make. And in whatever little law we learnt along the way, what we heard is that the Supreme Court has read into and expanded the scope of a fundamental right. This is an important bearing on the events that followed. Now once that judgment came, it was literally like letting the cat loose among the pigeons, and this is where we started learning our lessons about the nature of the political system. the Supreme Court gave the Election Commission 2 months, that is from May 2nd to July 2nd, time to fully implement the judgment. And we had the privilege of receiving a copy of the judgment right here in Hyderabad. At that time I was working with Velugu. And Mr. Lingdo came here. I didn't know at that time that he was going to retire and settle down in Hyderabad. So he had come for some personal work and he handed me the first copy of that judgment. And we had a discussion with him and asked him, what would you do, sir, if somebody refuses to file that affidavit? So he said, we'll have to examine it. And I remember thinking, et tu Brutus, that is, now you're also going to back off, because he had become Chief Election Commissioner meanwhile. Then the political parties launched a rather, I would say, a vicious campaign trying to throw mud at not the judgment. They can't talk about the Supreme Court, but at the so-called people behind it. So people like Arun Jaitley and Amar Singh, one speaks or distorts the truths while speaking in English, the other one does it while speaking in Hindi, but I don't see much difference. They do the same thing. They went to various meetings, they went to the chambers of commerce, they went to the television, the media, and started saying, they were using phrases like rent a cause NGOs. That means some World Bank or somebody has funded us and we are just creating a sensation. Rent a cause NGOs, elitist concern in the cocktail circuit. And people who have never fought elections are now trying to reform it. And anyway, we are going to do things far beyond what the Supreme Court says. So they were launching a large public campaign trying to discredit what was happening. And it was an unequal battle because the media will go and speak to them, they won't speak to people like us. And they also have a certain advantage. We were trained as children to speak the truth by our parents. Maybe they didn't learn the same thing from their parents because they have no constraint. They can say whatever they like, and truth is not a barrier to the statements that many politicians make. So this was going on, and then on June 28th, the Chief Election Commissioner issued orders fully implementing in letter and spirit the judgment. That really let loose the cat among the pigeons. 10 days before, on June 16th, the cabinet of this country, headed by Atal Bihari Vajpayee, they met only to discuss the Supreme Court judgment. This was front page news, I remember, in the Hindu. And the cabinet was trying to decide how to deal with the Supreme Court judgment. The only thing Supreme Court had said is that candidates must declare their financial, criminal and educational background. It is not a disqualification, it is only a disclosure. And there was a phrase that they used that we have to find a consensus to deal with this issue. Some kind of gobbledygook that how do we get rid of this judgment. That's the essence of that. So when the Election Commission issued the orders, literally all hell broke loose for the political parties. On July 8th, all-party meeting was held in Delhi. 21 political parties met. This was in the news and on the TV channels and all that. And from the extreme left wing to the extreme right wing, those who believe that armed revolution will save this country, to those who believe that medieval Hinduism will save this country. The entire spectrum of these people were sitting there. And they unanimously came to a consensus and they issued a statement that we reject this Supreme Court judgment. That was very revealing for us because one of the questions that arises is what price ideology? Because they achieved complete unanimity, so they really closed ranks when they saw that there is a kind of a attack or a threat from outside, which is basically people like you and me, the citizens. Later on we coined this phrase that political parties are organizations of deep ideological flexibility. Not deep ideological conviction, but usually that is our analysis, that they use ideology to get votes. Whether they believe in those ideologies or not, nobody knows about all that, because it's just a vote gathering means. And the fact that they all came together also indicated to us that this system is going to resist all forms of change, and we have to recognize that. We can't expect that, depend on goodwill and all that. Meanwhile, actually, there's a very fine organization here, right here, I think many of you know about, Lok Satta. Lok Satta was also involved with us. There was a whole network of NGOs that had got together. So we went and actually met the political parties, leaders of political parties, while this thing was going on, to try and get them to agree that they will not oppose this judgment. What the government ended up doing on July 8th after this all-party meeting is, by July 15th, within 1 week, they drafted an amendment to the Representation of People Act. And the substance of that was in Article 33 there in that Act, which said that notwithstanding any court judgment or Election Commission directive, no candidate shall be required to file any information other than what is specified in this Act. And they effectively nullified or sought to nullify the Supreme Court judgment, and they said that candidates' financial information will be filed with the Lok Sabha Speaker after they win, and it will not be made available to the public, and so on and so forth. Now this also reveals something else about the government and the political system. Within 1 week they were able to draft a legislation between July 8th and July 15th. No substantial legislation on electoral reforms had been passed since 1947 except the RP Act itself, 51 and 53. But after that there was no real substantial legislation on electoral reforms, dilly-dallying on all kinds of issues. But the moment there is a threat, within 1 week they are able to come up with an act. What it showed to us is that, and I strongly believe that when the government wants to act and when it wants to be efficient, they can be more efficient than anybody, including the best in the private sector, if they want to do it. But generally it seems that they don't want to. Now once this amendment was being circulated, we, as I said, went to the political parties, some of the leaders. We went and met Dr. Manmohan Singh, for instance, who was then not the Prime Minister. And in fact I went with JP and what's his name, Admiral Teliani and Kuldeep Nair. 4 of us went to meet him in his chambers in the Rajya Sabha. And while he didn't say that he opposes this judgment, he did say a couple of things. One of the things he said is that I am sharing this in the spirit of right to information. I don't think this was a secret because, you know, he's a public figure, so I don't see why it should be a secret. One of the things he said is, see, I have no problem in declaring my assets, but a lot of people who have black money, they will not declare their assets and I will look bad because, you know, I will honestly declare what I have. That's one of the things he said. The second thing he said is that if I declare my wife's jewelry, there's nobody to protect us because, you know, there are abduction agencies in Noida and they can, you know, come and kidnap my family members and all that. So I was actually provoked to say that, sir, if you sitting in government can't protect your own family members, you'll quit the government and come and join us. Let's fight for a better system. And then the third statement that one of us made to him is that, Dr. Manmohan Singh, you are the intellectual face of the political system for us and we look to you for statesmanship. And his reply, which I still remember, is that, Dr. Shastri, before I become a statesman, I have to make sure that I am sitting on the seat. And subsequent history has proved, perhaps, that he was not exactly telling lies. I mean, he meant what he said because that's what is happening. We don't expect me to be a statesman. Before that, I have to make sure I am sitting on this chair. We also went to meet Mr. Venkaiah Naidu. I tried speaking to him in Telugu. It didn't make much difference. And he's a seasoned politician. He said, if it is in voters' interest, we should do something about it. Don't worry, we'll look at it and some vague generalities. And he brushed us aside. The only parties which actually first opposed it and later on supported it were the left. The CPI, actually, they said that it's okay with them. They are all right if this information. Initially they opposed it, but later on they did not oppose it. The CPI, but CPM is a different kind of a party. Then we went to meet Dr. Abdul Kalam as just as a symbolic sort of meeting to request him to return the bill as and when it is passed. Now the political system has its own dynamics. They wanted to pass that bill in the monsoon session of 2002, and their great concern was that in December the famous Gujarat elections post Godhra were going to take place, and they didn't want any such disclosure or any such sort of distortion of their version of the electoral process. So they were very keen to pass this bill in 2002 in August, but unfortunately they could not do so because Parliament was what is it called, adjourned sine die or something for 10 days because there was this famous petrol pump scam that was going on at that time, and they didn't find time to pass that bill. And the next session was in winter, but by that time the Gujarat elections would have already taken place. So they did, the only alternative was to issue an ordinance. So they issued an ordinance on August 23rd saying to implement this amendment to the RP Act, basically denying the voters the right to know this. So at that time we went to meet the President requesting him to return the ordinance, which he did. I believe there are about half a dozen instances where the President has returned a bill for questioning. But the very next day it was sent back to him, and the only grace that the government showed is they sent Soli Sorabji, who was then the Attorney General, to explain to him in person why they are sending it back, and saying that whatever concerns the President had raised, they would take care of it when the ordinance was converted into a bill. So the President signed it, and that became the sort of law in force at that time. Then we went back to the court. By this time there were at least 15 NGOs, and in 3 separate petitions, I mean between us, there was a little bit of jostling because everybody wanted to file that petition first so that their name gets into the books of history. So 3 different petitions were filed, including one by us also. And the substance of our challenge of that petition was that since this act limits and restricts the scope of a fundamental right as laid down in the earlier judgment, because it is now saying that they will not give this information, therefore it is unconstitutional. And there is a constitutional provision, and there are several Supreme Court judgments which say that even Parliament does not have the right to limit or restrict the scope of a fundamental right unless there is some grave emergency or something like that. I'm sure the Justice will explain it to us better, but that is the essential part of that argument. Now there was a very interesting twist in that. Mr. Arun Jaitley, who was then the Law Minister, in a cabinet reshuffle had stepped down, and he actually appeared in court. And he said, "My Lord, the right to vote is not a fundamental right, it is a statutory right." Which means that Parliament, in its magnificent generosity, has conferred upon you and me the right to vote. And therefore Parliament can also sort of... So this thing about the right to vote being a fundamental right, and therefore the Supreme Court saying that it has expanded the scope of it, is null and void, and therefore this whole petition should be thrown out. We were actually aghast. A law minister of this country can stand up in the Supreme Court in the world's largest democracy and say, "My Lord, the right to vote is not a fundamental right, it is a statutory right." So actually subsequently we were very happy that he said that, because in its final judgment the Supreme Court not only struck down the amendment as unconstitutional, it also nailed down this issue of the right to vote. They said yes, technically it's not a fundamental right, but they said it's a constitutional right, and it derives from the very basic structure of the Constitution. We, the people of India, do hereby give unto ourselves, what is it? Secular, socialist, democratic republic. The word democratic is part of the very basic feature of the Constitution.
It was only the feature in the initial.
I beg your pardon?
Socialists were brought in by Indira Gandhi much
Correct.
later.
Anyway, that is not the point here. The point is about the word democracy. It is very much there, and since we are a democracy, it is a part of the basic feature of the Constitution, and therefore they declared it to be a constitutional right. So that settles the matter. Now, there are so many judgments which come and go. We were not happy with that. We wanted that there should be some ground level change. By the way, Vikram, how much time do I have? I mean, because you'll speak for 15-20 minutes. Longer, okay. No, it's a long story and I don't want to tax your patience.
Very interesting.
So then we decided that so many Supreme Court judgments come and go. After all, sati was abolished in the 17th century, but it's not really abolished because it's only abolished in the statute books. What do we do at the ground to try and see that something happens. So we actually got this technology from Lok Satta initially, which had floated this concept of Citizen Election Watch. But now we had a very powerful tool in our hands, which is the information filed by the candidates. So we started setting up citizen election watches around the country. The only reason we haven't done it in Andhra is because the great banyan tree Lok Satta was active here, and they were doing a fine job, so we didn't want to sort of intrude in a sense. So we started setting up citizen election watches in different states, and just to give you a feel for what that kind of activism is, I'll just take the example of 1 or 2 states. In Gujarat, we went and asked 3 retired Chief Justices of the Gujarat High Court to join this election watch committee. Maybe you know some of them: Justice Desai, P.D. Desai, Justice V.T. Shah, and Justice Diwan, B.J. Diwan. So they agreed, a former director of IIM Ahmedabad, some retired secretaries to the Government of India from the IAS, some people who were from the Police Service, Director Generals of Police, people who were from civil society, who were not part of any political party, and generally known for their honesty and integrity, and not having had any taint throughout their career. So we formed a high-profile citizen election watch committee like that, and then Jagdeep and I, we started going around visiting the newspapers. So we went to the newspapers, and we were very conscious that less than 10% of India actually speaks English. So we targeted the Gujarati newspapers, the Gujarat Samachar, the Sandesh, the Sambhav, the leading newspapers in Gujarat there. And we had an ace up our sleeve. We went up to them and said, "This is the Supreme Court judgment, sir. This is our election watch committee." And of course the editors knew all these people, at least by reputation, if not personally. And we need your help. We are going to do this work of disseminating voter information to candidate information to voters, and we require your support to this dissemination. All of them, of course, agreed. And so we were able to get the media support.
Were the candidates mandated to file that
Yes.
information
They were
because of the Supreme Court judgment?
Absolutely, and the Election Commission said that if they don't file it, the nomination paper will be considered incomplete and rejected, so they would have to file it.
And who will verify the...
Yeah,
No
yeah.
verification.
All these questions are there, and we have to discuss them. So once this election watch committee was set up, we got a group of volunteers. I'm happy to see some young people sitting at the back. These were the backbone of our election watch work. They came in good numbers, and we were sitting up to 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the night every day, and it was a bit of a tricky exercise because we had some 2,000 pages of affidavits, nearly all in Gujarati, and most of our trustees, we were all innocent of Gujarati, and so we had to translate back and forth between English and Gujarati. Anyway, and there's a very short time period because the nomination papers close and the elections are held in a period of 18 to 20 days. And we wanted to time the press conferences for releasing this information at least 1 week in advance. So we really had about 10 to 12 days. And in those days, this information was not available on the website. So we had to collect information from all the districts in Gujarat very quickly, summarize them, bring out reports, hold press conferences and all that. But thanks to the enthusiasm of the volunteers, we were able to do that. This was, of course, front page news and banner headlines in the Gujarati newspapers, and many of them actually carried full page inside, giving full details of all the candidates. So and so charged under IPC 302. Those of you who have seen the Hindi movies, Dafa 302 matlab khoon ka iljam, murder. So there are many such wonderful candidates who had stood for elections, and some of them, of course, also won. So let me stop with that election watch as far as Gujarat is concerned. What was the impact? Zero. I mean, it created a bit of a flutter, there was a lot of news, there was discussion, but as far as we could judge on voter behavior or on the outcome of elections, it was zero. But frankly, we were not disappointed actually. We didn't expect that this is going to revolutionize the country or voters are going to change as a result of that. Let me just give you the example of 2 more states where things started happening, because these are long-term things. Things don't happen on day one. That was in 2002, but we started seeing the results later on in 2005. So in 2005, we had by this time started getting some funds Ford Foundation started funding us. Earlier we had no money, so we were just spending our own money and doing whatever we could. So with that money we hired some staff and we started touring around the districts of Bihar. We said we must do an intensive work there. Bihar is a very sort of important state, if I put it diplomatically, and we need to make as much of an impact as we possibly can. So we literally visited all the districts, a team of us, and we used to hold regional workshops in Nalanda, Muzaffarpur, Bhagalpur and so on, Sitamarhi, followed up by a state level workshop where all the NGOs who were interested came, and our basic plea to them was that, look guys, you know, this is what the Supreme Court is saying, this is what we've done in other states, why don't you participate in this? The response in Bihar was amazing. It was the best response that we ever got in any state, and we said, ab haath khada karne ka samay aa gaya. So for each district who will raise hands and say that they will take responsibility. I think in that meeting we covered 36 out of 38 states. In hindsight, I feel that enthusiasm had nothing to do with us. That enthusiasm was because the people of Bihar were sick and tired of what was going on, and they found that this is something, maybe a small threat, that you can actually do and do something about it. So the election watch there really reached into the interior areas, and the Hindi media particularly, and the Hindi channels, ETV Bihar and Sahara Samay and some of the most popular channels there in Bihar, they were running those tickers, 24-hour tickers, that so and so candidate from such and such constituency, charged under IPC 302 and so on and so forth. These things were going on continuously, and at least I know that it is true in Telugu and in Hindi, the vernacular media has every day a district pullout, which is particular news of that particular district. So the district pullouts contain full information of the candidates pertaining to that district. So there was a fairly heavy media coverage, and people like Pankaj Pachauri, they came to Bihar and held talk shows and started grilling the politicians on this. The outcome of that was a little encouraging for us actually. One of the things that happened is that a very well-known leader in Bihar, he called us and said, "Aap humko badnaam kyun kar rahe hain? Why are you defaming us?" And we said, "We are not defaming you, we are just putting forward whatever you have given into the public domain." Anyway, he came, he is too big a man, so he sent his son to meet us. And he was trying to figure out if we have been put up by the opposition, and once he realized that we had not been put up by the opposition, we asked him, "Why are you so hassled about it?" He said, "Delhi se sawal uth rahe hain." That is, the party's top bosses in Delhi asked the General Secretary in charge of elections in Bihar that why did you give a ticket to this candidate? Actually, when we started back in '99 in my office, that was our hope. That when this starts reaching at the top and it starts coming out, something has to give somewhere, because our faith was that not all the politicians are corrupt. Not all the top politicians are murderers and rapists and gangsters. Something has to give somewhere. So that started happening. The second thing is Nitish Kumar, the CM designate, was being grilled that you are talking about new governance, this, that and the other, but your party has the same list of candidates as all the other parties. There's no difference. So he said that if a tainted candidate wins, we will not make him a minister. And that actually happened, and today you can also go and see the websites of Bihar and the list of ministers, and we can provide that information. I personally checked it. For the first time in decades, Bihar has a cabinet of ministers at the state level, none of whom have a criminal charge.
Wow.
So we started feeling encouraged by that.
That's amazing.
Bit of luck. I mean, also faith. I don't think our country is so bad. If our country is so bad, we should close it down. You know? I don't think we are such bad people. I think the ordinary people are good, and when they start raising their voice, things start happening. Then the more recently in Uttar Pradesh, the Mulayam Singh assembly had 206 MLAs out of 403 who had criminal records. In the current assembly, headed by Mayawati, that has come down to 160. As a professor of statistics, I will tell you that it is statistically significant, but as a citizen, I am not happy because I think there are 160 too many, but some impact has been made. And Rahul Gandhi was desperately trying to revive himself and the Congress in Uttar Pradesh at that time, you will recall. And he heard about us because there were 7 phases. In the first 2-3 phases, they ignored us, but by the 4th phase, they started realizing that there is some big thing going on, and this press conferences are happening, people are releasing the data on candidate background. He actually called our office in Banaras and wanted the list of Congress candidates who have got a criminal record, or whatever, all the list of Congress candidates that we released. Which means that someone at the top, whatever his IQ level, is beginning to react about this, the work that the citizens of Uttar Pradesh started doing. We learned 2 more things. One is that both the BJP and the Congress have started asking candidates who are first time looking for tickets, first time candidates, to fill in the same affidavit and give it to the party bosses that they would have to give if they got a ticket to the Election Commission. So some process of party scrutiny has started. The most encouraging thing for us, is that if you look at first time candidates, because we've got now more than 20,000 records, maybe you can put up one of those slides there. The first time candidates are largely clean. In the current Lok Sabha, out of 543 MPs, only 183 are old-timers, 2/3 of them are new first-time candidates, and they're largely clean. Now, of course, the cynics will say that they have put up their wives, husbands, their dog, cat, etc. as a front candidate. It is true that some of that is happening, but at least they're trying to hide and shift and so on. But it is also encouraging that first-time candidates are largely clean. I don't think we can claim that this is a revolution, but maybe we can cautiously say that maybe it is the beginning of a very, very small and silent revolution, this way the profile of candidates is changing. Unfortunately, in the media, what happens is you hear about Shahabuddin, and yesterday that Pappu Yadav has gone to jail because dog bites man never makes news, only man bites dog makes news. So if there are clean candidates, it's not going to make news. So this is the kind of what I've tried to compress about 8 years of work in this somewhat brief talk. We have also gained some other advantages, resources which we have today. One is we have very solid backing with the Election Commission. Every year we hold a national conference on electoral reform. Since 2003 we held it first time in Ahmedabad, then in Bangalore, Patna, and this year in Lucknow in August. Every time the Chief Election Commissioner has personally come and attended the conference and even spoke there. In fact, this year in Lucknow for the first time, all the 3 election commissioners came. Mr. Gopal Swamy, Naveen Chawla and Qureshi, all the 3 came. The Standing Committee of Parliament's chairman, Dr. Nachiyappan, on electoral reforms, he called on his own and he also came for the conference. And some big names from the media like Pankaj Bachodi and others were also there. So the profile has started improving. So what do we have today? Some of the impacts I've tried to mention. We have very good working relationship with the Election Commission. We don't take any funds from them, and we have consciously decided not to accept any funds from them, although they have some money for such activities, for raising voter awareness. We have very good working relationships with the media. And last but not the least, most important, at last count, we have partnered with 1,200 NGOs around the country. In Uttar Pradesh alone, we had 120 NGO partners who participated in this activity. I think this is a wealth of resource that we have, and we are still trying to figure out how we can utilize it to bring about further sort of change to the extent that we can. Let me just close with a few comments, and I'm sure there will be lots of discussion and agreements and disagreements. See, we are not, at least I am not an intellectual, but we had the privilege of discussing this issue with several intellectuals around the country. And one of the debates that we have heard is that democracy, governance, electoral reforms is a vast subject, and candidate disclosure is not even the tip of the iceberg, it is nothing. Things go far deeper than that, and we need to take a much more holistic perspective and work on several issues. And one of the issues, for example, they will talk about is the issue of election funding. Mr. Ashok Gehlot told our partners in Rajasthan that if you really want to fix this problem, fix the funding issue. And several intellectuals have also told us that you must get a handle on the funding, because the money power that is being used in elections is the mother cause or the root cause of much of the distortions that take place not only in politics but in subsequent governance. Because the person who has spent 5 crores to win an election, the moment he or she wins, they spend their term trying to recover that 5 crores and maybe multiply it by a few more numbers, and so therefore you'll never get good governance unless you can do something about the election funding, and so on and so forth. Then there are other issues like do we have this British parliamentary democracy, is it the best system? Now there are many systems in the world. You have the American system, you have the list or proportional representation system, you have the French system where you have to get at least 51% votes. Then there are all kinds of problems, booth capturing, violence, use of musclement, distribution of liquor, then voter rolls being totally hopelessly out of place, and so there are hundreds of problems out there regarding elections and democracy. But our view, and that's where I think we need some advice and feedback, is that how do we get people involved? How do we do something which is practical? Because the moment you talk about the list system, it requires a constitutional amendment. At least I can say our organization does not have the wherewithal. This is some interesting statistics about the number of percentage of candidates with criminal records and so on. Now, we don't have the wherewithal to bring about constitutional amendments. We have seen that the Women Representation Bill, whatever our personal views on it, has been hanging fire for 10 years. It doesn't even require, it just requires a legislation. But if you want to change the parliamentary democratic system, or talk about any kind of laws that Parliament has to pass, I am not very sure that they will do it just because we are saying so. Unless they have no other option, they will not do it. And we don't have the strength or resources as of now to force Parliament to do certain things. So that's why we don't focus on it. The other issue is how do we get people to participate? We have certain thought process on that. One is we must create tools that ordinary folks can use practically and participate. Example of that is any citizen of this country or any NGO or any activist can go to a returning officer or today to the website and download information about the candidate. And if he or she wants, they can disseminate it or do whatever they like. So this is a practical tool in the hands of ordinary citizens. If we work in that mode, there is more likely for wider participation. If we confine our discussion to high-sounding intellectual and constitutional matters, however important they may be, we will not get people enthusiastically involved. And unfortunately, democracy, or fortunately, democracy and the politicians, they only respond to numbers. They don't respond to intellectualism or to good ideas. Generally, they don't. So therefore, that's the first issue that we have, that let us try to think on lines where we can get more participation. Second issue is that we need to pick an issue which will not divide us. At least I am very strongly of that opinion. For example, Justice just mentioned that he is in favor of the list system. Now the difficulty is that I know an equal number of eminent justices who are not in favor of the list system and who are in favor of some other system. Now if you want to get into a movement, firstly this is a very intellectual issue. And secondly, when you are going to divide people across opinions, you will not get that unity and that consensus. But you take the simple issue of keep the crooks out, criminalization of politics. This immediately brings unity. whether you are a Supreme Court justice or an ordinary laborer, whether you are a Hindu, Muslim, man, woman, urban, rural, rich, poor, believe in free markets or in communism or socialism or whatever your political ideology is, across the spectrum, people would agree at least this much, that we need to keep the crooks out. Some people may say that, well, yeah, on the margin it's worth doing, but it's not the most important thing, but nobody will say it should not be done. So the second principle that we have kept for ourselves, if we want to trigger off large scale change, particularly in issues of democracy and governance, is we have to pick issues that people will agree and unite on, and there will be no disagreement on those issues. The moment we pick divisive issues, we will keep fighting with each other, and those guys sitting in parliament will be laughing at us, and it will not get to first base. So this is in anticipation of some of the questions that might come. I thought I'll just explain whatever little philosophy or action strategy we have. So let me stop here, and thank you for your patience.
Not clear to me still
Yes, sir.
how you verify
Why don't you sit
the
down?
I'll sit down. Okay.
But you stand there. No, don't worry about it.
information given. The data given by the candidates, information given by the, how to verify, who is to do it and what is the machinery.
See, several cases of false information have come to light, but overall the percentage is much lower than one would expect. The reason is,
How do you know it's false?
because if somebody says in his affidavit that his bank balance is nil, his cash balance is nil, he has no assets, no properties, he has no nothing, then it is clearly false.
No, but who has determined that? That's the question, no? There has to be a body, there has to be an agency
Right,
for verification and determination.
correct.
Which is that?
No, there is no body. Now I'll tell you why. See, we are unfortunately just activists. We have taken off our intellectual hat when we do this work.
Opposition candidate will take care of that.
No.
That cannot be.
Anyway, let him.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. Now, if you get technical, how do I know it is false? It is our feeling it is false because he has declared zero bank balance, cash it, and you can go on saying, how do I know? I do not know, but I think he is telling lies. So
But
we've
I
got
think
hundreds of such.
It is basically people's perception is the check, as you say.
There is no
Yes.
check.
No, there is no check. People's perception is a check.
No, there is a strange psychology
Because
here.
if I say I have zero assets,
See, politicians
people
don't think
know
like
that
us.
You are not in
Politicians
politics with
feel-
zero assets.
Politicians feel that
They don't think.
they are afraid of the election commission. If there is one thing that the politicians are afraid of, they are afraid of the election commission. To a lesser extent, they are afraid of the Supreme Court, and to a much lesser extent, they are afraid of the media. But they are not afraid of you and me and the police and the law and order and all that. They just don't care. But since they are afraid of the election commission, there is some vague fear that if they give totally false, something may happen to them. That is one. And those who are outright gangsters and criminals, I think one has to study their psychology. I don't know, but I'm just trying to read between the lines. They have a feeling of being invincible, impregnable, invulnerable. Says, "Arey, dekh lo yaar, kya kar loge?" I am telling you, I have been charged with 20 murders. Do what you can. They have that kind of feeling. So they also declare that. Now the reason, we can easily go to court and ask them that they should do something about verification, body, and if there is a false thing, what should we do? The reason we are hesitating to go to court is that if the court says that nothing can be done, the only language they understand is because of this false affidavit, his nomination paper ought to have been rejected and therefore the election is set aside. That is the only language they understand. If the court merely expresses its anguish and says that somebody should do something about it and passes some strictures, they don't care. Our fear is if we go to court and court doesn't set the elections aside for such candidates,
That
then
will
the
be
whole thing
unprecedented.
falls flat. So we just don't want to touch that. That is the reason why we are not
Sir, that election commission was very much worried about that thing. How will they don't have the machinery and secretariat or the means of verifying and determining? So have they accepted that responsibility? Are they now in charge of that?
No, they have not because they don't have the machinery. But our strategy and our goal is different from what you are highlighting. We are not worried about a few false affidavits. From the beginning, our strategy was to create a little bit of public awareness and media exposure and use that as a pressure point on the political bosses so that they start reforming themselves, and to some extent that has happened. I don't care if there are a few false affidavits here and there. We're talking about general system cleanup, and somebody telling lies here and there, while it is a matter of concern, we are not convinced that that's the most important issue to take up for us right now.
I can see that you have succeeded in improving the tone generally. That is something, there is a greater awareness, and to some extent it has been reduced. For instance, you said the first time candidates, they are generally clean now then. So that is okay. Empirically, I think in practical terms there has been some effect. But there's another point is how to determine criminality. So for instance, the anti-Hindi agitation in the 1960s and all that in Tamil Nadu, DMK. Then the Babri Masjid thing, Advani also was involved, the potential Prime Ministerial candidate. Now, there are some other parties started at the time saying, few years ago, that also should be treated as a criminal thing because he is involved in a prosecution. How to distinguish between this political kind of these things, offences, and other things, pure criminal things?
Yeah, see, this is a good question, and it comes up very often. We have two responses to that. One is that the Indian Penal Code was drafted by Parliament. It was not drafted by you and me. And these people take oath to swear by the Constitution. If breaking Babri Masjid or doing an anti-Hindi agitation and doing something attracts some sections of the Indian Penal Code, then it is up to Parliament to change that Indian Penal Code. Second, if you are such a wonderful worker and you are genuinely working for the cause of Hindus or Tamils or whatever you think you are working for, then the voters will understand. Even if you are charged with Rasta Roko on a Tamil agitation, the voters will say, great man, like Raj Thackeray, people will be now praising him. So it doesn't matter, the voters will understand. It is only a disclosure, it is not a disqualification. So we don't really worry about that.
Yeah.
I have a point. Sir, Dr. Shastri, one of the things that could happen in such a situation is that the parties which are in power can easily foist cases against the powerful candidates who think that they are in the opposition and they could fight them. So it's quite possible that they could be implicated in false cases.
Correct.
And yet that becomes a part of disclosure. And it's difficult for the voter to know whether this is a true case or a foisted case.
See, what is happening is that I don't have time to get into the details. In state after state, we find that as many people from the ruling party have got criminal cases as people from the opposition. So, if it was only a question of foisted and false cases, the opposition, the ruling party members would not have been implicated, and they are being implicated while the government, while they have been in power. The second thing is that the Supreme Court has said that these cases should have been at least 6 months prior to the election, so that they don't do it at the last minute. Finally, I again will appeal to the justice to correct me if I make a mistake. At what stage do somebody have to file this thing that I am charged with a crime? It is not an FIR. After an FIR, an investigation is conducted. After the investigation, a charge sheet is filed, typically in a JMFC, Judicial Magistrate First Class, and the judicial mind is applied. And if prima facie evidence is found that the charge sheet is valid, then charges are framed. And in the United States, they call it indicted or indicted. So it is at that stage, after all this process has gone through, that a candidate would have to declare it. And finally, we can only say that this is for disclosure and not disqualification. If you are such a good candidate and you have such good rapport with the people and people are so happy with you, they will understand that these are false cases. So I don't think there is a real threat to democracy. At least we have not seen that so far. And there is some due process of law which has to take place before somebody has to file this case.
I would like to just add something to this. Now Lok Satta is a political party here in Andhra Pradesh. So now this is a vacant place for us to work on, because 1 year down the line election is there in Andhra Pradesh. So why can't we come together now? It's a time that, we got a chance now to do what you have done in all other states. So we are here, Manthan is ready, we can do it.
What is your name, sir?
Sudhir.
Sudhir, you have gladdened my heart. and वो हिंदी में बोलते हैं मेरा 1.5 पाव खून बढ़ा दिया आपने. Thank you very much. We need that help. And actually our view is that we have certain principles that we work on, and since you offered to help, I will just state them. One is we remain scrupulously non-partisan as far as political parties are concerned. We believe that you can't be an umpire and a batsman. Either you're an umpire or a batsman. We are self-appointed umpires, so we don't bat for any political party.
Not even empire, we are third empire sitting.
Whatever it is. Number one. Number two is that we demand the same level of transparency from us, ourselves and our partners that we demand from the political parties. So if we want them to be transparent, we demand that we should be transparent, and if you want to work with us, you or your organization has to be also transparent. So if that is acceptable to you, we'll work with you.
You have to file disclosure.
Professor Shastri, I have a silly comment.
Sir.
Whenever you take some assistance from foreign foundation,
Yeah.
you know, I've seen from my early days, it is a CIA money.
Right.
So aren't you concerned about taking money, even for academic projects? I've been a professor and former director of Institute of Economic Growth.
Correct.
Any money that comes from abroad in those days, 60s and 70s, is a CIA money. So I mean, it's just a silly question.
No, it's a very important question. Actually, we need funds. I don't deny it. And we would prefer to get funds ideally from citizens, 5 rupees, 10 rupees, 1,000 rupees, 5,000 rupees. But we don't have the time or energy or the skill to raise that. Second best option is to raise money from Indian philanthropists. We have tried our best, sir, except a few, I don't want to name them in public, who have been very helpful. We have not been able to raise funds from, right now we are trying to get some funds from the Dorabji Tata Trust. In fact, I was writing the proposal today in the morning when he came. We would prefer to take money from Dorabji Tata Trust or Ratan Tata Trust or Infosys Foundation or whatever other foundations we have in Hyderabad rather than from Ford Foundation. I would really prefer that. But
They left one day, when they don't like the entire movement, they will say it is a CIA money.
let them say,
No,
let
but
them say, they will say so many things.
because
I have a
perception.
question.
1 minute, there's a questioner waiting there. After that,
Good evening, sir. I would like to know what kind of disclosures you make in case of Indian Penal Code as well as white collar crimes. Do you also give financial statements of all the candidates from past 3-4 years or 5 years, or just you give more importance to Indian Penal Code only?
No, we also give out information on the finances, but this is as they have declared in the affidavit. We have certain limitations because they are actually supposed to file income tax returns. They're supposed to file it every year with the Lok Sabha, and we would actually, if possible, like to track what the guy started off with his nomination paper with 20 lakhs, and at the end of 5 years he's ended up with 20 crores. We would like to track that, but we don't have the funds and the manpower to do that kind of detailed analysis as of now. But we are trying to do it.
But as per Indian, what new law has come where you can, in right for information, can you not use that and publish that?
Let me tell you about the right to information. One of the things, see, we try to think about what we consider as strategic interventions. So after 7 or 8 years of work, we are very stupid people. We got another idea. I wonder why we didn't get it on day one. We decided that we will use the right to information to ask for the audited financial statements of political parties. Many of you would be surprised to know that audited financial statements of political parties are not available in the public domain. So we wrote to the Lok Sabha, the political parties, the Central Board of Direct Taxes, and the Election Commission. The Election Commission said that they don't file it with us, which was a surprise to me. Audited financial statements of political parties are not filed with the Election Commission. The only thing they file is a statement of election expenses, which is different from audited financial statements. The political parties didn't reply to our appeal. The Communist Party was the only party against CPI which replied, saying that we don't have to give you this information. Of course, Lok Sabha didn't give it to us. The political parties didn't give it to us. The Election Commission doesn't have it. And the Central Board of Direct Taxes, after 1 year of appeals and second appeals, we still haven't got that information. We had 2 rounds of hearings in the final appeal at the CIC office in Delhi, and they are tithering and waffling. And then in the last hearing, the representatives of all the political parties, along with high-priced lawyers. Some of them are well-known and come on TV. I'm sure they're very brilliant people, but they have sold their soul for whatever money the political parties are willing to give them. And they appeared before the Central Information Commission raising all kinds of stupid technical and legal objections to why this information should not be given. So that is the status of right to information, and the battle is not going to end now. Because if we win from the CIC and they are supposed to give, they'll go to the court. And if they win, we will go to the court. So ultimately it will take another 3 years for it to be settled. Whereas you can go to a website, Federal Election Commission, United States, and you can get the entire statements of a Democratic Party. You can today find out how much money Hillary Clinton has spent or Obama has spent on their this thing. It's publicly available. But in this great democracy that we have, nothing is available. So we have a long fight ahead of us.
It's not only the political party, the candidates which are running for the election, their financial records for
That
at least 5 to 8 years, audited or whatever they have filed with IT.
That is available. See, what they are filing in the nomination papers is available.
It is like already which they have filed with the IT Act, or they are just disclosing on their own?
They are disclosing at the time of nomination papers their financial records, and that is available. And if you send me an email, I'll deluge you with information, which there's lots of that information.
And as per like Indian Penal Code, what kind of crimes you deal in?
Whatever is an IPC code, we don't distinguish.
As sir said that it could be a political movement under whom.
You see, why do we say,
Focus on what kind of
did you write the IPC? Did I write the IPC? The fellows who are violating the IPC sitting in parliament, now they are crying foul. Why should we, our hearts bleed for them? अगर उनमें हिम्मत और दम है तो आईपीसी को बदले ना वहाँ पे. आईपीसी उन्होंने ही बनाया है और उसी का उल्लंघन खुद ही कर रहे हैं. तो why should we feel sympathy for them? Let them change the IPC. Say political IPC is different. They don't have any such classification. Why should our hearts bleed for them? You sit in. Why should the nature of politics in India always be rasta roko dharna, burning buses and this and that and section 144? Is there no other way of politics? Is that the only way you can do politics? So I am not in favor of classifying and declassifying them as this and that. Let them change the IPC if they think that this is not correct.
At least for public disclosure, you can classify that.
I will not do that, sir. I have told you my view again and again.
Yeah.
You start a parallel movement and do it differently.
As a common man,
I will not do it. I don't agree with you.
I am not saying that. As a common man, I need to know under which section.
We will say section 144, what the prohibitory orders violated. Let the people understand whatever they from there. We give a description.
I have a different question.